Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I used to believe that love always found its way back to the person who gave it first, that if you loved someone deeply enough, even time and distance would respect that bond. I believed that because it was the only way I could survive the choice I made 22 years ago, the choice that still echoes in my bones when the house goes quiet at night. Back then, I was 24, newly divorced, and carrying a grief I didn't yet have language for. My daughter, Naomi, was barely 6 months old when my world collapsed in a way that felt permanent. Her father left without a warning, without a goodbye, without a single question about her future. He took his clothes, his smile, and the illusion that I was safe. What he left behind was a woman who hadn't slept in weeks, a baby who cried with needs I couldn't always meet, and a body that was slowly betraying me from the inside. The diagnosis came softly, like bad news wrapped in medical politeness. Complications after childbirth, an infection that had gone unnoticed, organs struggling, treatments that would weaken me before they healed me. I remember nodding as if I understood everything, even though my mind kept circling the same fear. How do I take care of a baby when I can barely stand? That was when Leela stepped in. Leela had been my best friend since we were 16. We shared clothes, secrets, first heartbreaks. She knew my family better than I did sometimes. When my mother passed years earlier, Leela held me through the night. When I got married, she stood beside me, smiling so hard you'd think she was the one in love. And when my body finally gave out, she didn't hesitate. She showed up with casseroles, washed bottles without being asked, slept on my couch with Naomi tucked against her chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. At first, it was temporary. That's what we told ourselves, just until I got stronger, just until the treatments worked, just until I could be a mother again. Leela suggested Naomi stay with her during the worst weeks. She had a stable job, a quiet home, and no children of her own. She said it would help me heal faster if I didn't have to worry. I cried when I agreed. I remember holding Naomi so tightly that she fussed, her tiny hands curling into my hospital gown. I whispered promises into her hair that night. Mommy will come back for you. Mommy just needs to get better. Mommy loves you more than anything. Leela stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes, nodding like a witness to something sacred. I believed her loyalty was unbreakable. The weeks turned into months. My recovery was slower than anyone expected. Some days I couldn't even lift my arms. Leela brought pictures, Naomi's first laugh, Naomi sitting up, Naomi reaching for Leela's face with familiarity that stung more than it should have. But I told myself it was okay. This was the cost of survival. I visited when I could, at first every weekend, then once a month, then less. Each visit felt harder. Naomi didn't reach for me. She looked at me with polite curiosity, like I was a relative she hadn't met yet. Leela always reassured me. She's still little. She knows who you are. Don't pressure yourself. Get well first. I clung to those words like medicine. When the doctors finally said I was stable, life had already rearranged itself without my permission. I had lost my job, my savings were gone, my body was thinner, weaker, unfamiliar, and somewhere in that long stretch of illness, I had also lost my confidence as a mother. The fear crept in quietly. What if I can't give her what she needs? What if uprooting her now hurts her more? Leela never pushed, never rushed. She let me come to the conclusion myself, or at least I thought she did. She said Naomi was happy, that she was thriving, that love mattered more than biology. I told myself I was being selfless. I told myself I was choosing my daughter's stability over my pride. And one day, Without a court order or legal paperwork or a dramatic conversation, Naomi simply stayed. Years passed. I moved to a smaller apartment. I worked jobs that paid enough to survive, but not enough to dream. I sent money when I could. I sent gifts on birthdays. Leela sent pictures in return. School photos, missing teeth, dance recitals. I watched my daughter grow up through a screen, convincing myself that this was still motherhood, just in a different shape. Every now and then, guilt would rise up like a scream in my chest, but Leela always knew how to quiet it. You're doing what's best. She knows you love her. You'll always be her mother. I trusted her because I needed to, because admitting otherwise would mean admitting I had made a mistake too big to fix. The truth didn't come all at once. It never does. It arrives in fragments, in offhand comments, in the way people avoid your eyes. Naomi was 21 when she found me, not because Leela told her to, not because it was time, but because secrets have a way of breaking their own chains. She stood in my doorway with Leela's eyes and my mouth, hands trembling, voice steady in a way that felt rehearsed. She said my name like she'd been practicing it in private. She asked me why I never tried to get her back. That question split something open in me that I didn't know was still alive. I told her the story I had been telling myself for 2 decades, and she listened quietly before saying the words that changed everything. That's not what I was told. In that moment, I realized the story I survived on was never the full truth. It was the version I was allowed to have, and the woman I trusted more than anyone had been writing the rest without me. Naomi's words didn't sound angry. That was what scared me most. They sounded careful, like someone stepping around broken glass they didn't yet know belonged to them. She sat on the edge of my couch, hands folded in her lap, eyes taking in my small apartment as if it were a museum exhibit labeled Origin. I asked her what she had been told, even though my chest already felt tight with dread. She said Lila always explained my absence as a choice, that I wasn't ready to be a mother, that I loved her, yes, but from a distance, that some women just weren't built for the everyday parts of raising a child. Naomi said she'd grown up believing I was fragile in a way that made staying away kinder than trying and failing. Every sentence felt like a quiet erasure. I tried to interrupt, to correct, but she kept going, like she needed to empty the story out of herself before it poisoned something else. She said Lila never spoke badly of me, not directly. She just framed my absence as something inevitable, necessary, permanent. I remember gripping the edge of the couch, feeling the fabric dig into my palms, grounding me so I wouldn't float away from my own body. I told Naomi about the hospital, about the infection, the weakness, the months when I couldn't lift a glass without shaking. I told her about the nights I cried myself to sleep holding photos of her because my arms were empty. I told her I never signed anything, never gave her up. I just believed I was doing what was best because the person I trusted most told me it was. Naomi listened, tears finally spilling, but her expression wasn't relief. It was grief. She said she didn't know who to be angry at. She said she loved Lila. She called her mom without hesitation, without irony. That word hit me harder than any accusation could have. I nodded. I told her she didn't have to choose. I meant it. Love doesn't work like a courtroom verdict, but inside something old and wounded curled in on itself. After Naomi left that night, I sat alone until dawn. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Lila, searching for cracks I'd ignored. I thought about how she slowly stopped encouraging visits, how she'd reschedule last minute, saying Naomi had a cold or a school event, how she'd started calling herself Mama in videos, laughing it off when I noticed. I had told myself families evolved, that labels didn't matter as long as Naomi was loved. I had been so afraid of being selfish that I forgot to protect my place in my own child's life. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. I confronted Lila 2 days later. I didn't plan a speech. I just showed up at her door, heart pounding like it did when we were teenagers sneaking out at night. She looked older than I remembered, softer around the eyes. For a brief moment, I almost turned away, afraid of what honesty would destroy. But then I remembered Naomi's question, "Why didn't you try to get me back?" And I stepped inside. I asked Lila why she told Naomi I chose distance, why she never told her the truth. Lila didn't deny it. That was the second shock. She said she was protecting Naomi from confusion, that children need one center, one anchor. She said she never expected it to last forever, but then forever happened. She said she loved Naomi like her own, and somewhere along the way that love turned into fear, fear of losing her, fear of breaking something that felt whole. I asked her why she never talked to me about it, why she never said, "I'm scared, I want to keep her." Lila's voice broke when she answered, "Because I knew you'd take her, and I couldn't survive that." Hearing that felt like a confession and a theft all at once. She admitted she believed I would always choose what was easiest for Naomi, even if it meant stepping back. She had built a life on that assumption. She told herself I was grateful enough not to question it, and she was right until I wasn't. We cried, we yelled, we circled the same memories from opposite sides. There was no villain speech, no neat resolution, just two women standing in the wreckage of a decision that started as care and ended as possession. I told her she took something from me that I can never get back. She told me she gave Naomi a childhood filled with stability and love. Both things were true. That was the hardest part. Betrayal doesn't always wear the face of cruelty. Sometimes it looks like someone doing a good thing for too long without permission. Naomi didn't come around for weeks after that. I respected her space, even though every day felt like holding my breath underwater. When she finally reached out, it wasn't with clarity, it was with questions. She asked me what I wanted now. I told her the truth. I wanted time. I wanted honesty. I wanted to know her as an adult, not as a ghost from her childhood. I didn't want to erase Lila from her life. I just wanted room to exist in it too. She said she didn't know how to fit two mothers into one heart. I told her hearts are bigger than we think, but they grow slower when they've been protected by silence. We started small, coffee once a week, stories traded carefully like fragile objects. She told me about her childhood memories with Lila, about scraped knees and bedtime routines. I listened without interrupting, without competing. I shared my illness, my recovery, the years I spent believing distance was love. Sometimes we cried, sometimes we laughed at the strange similarities between us. She has my nervous habit of twisting rings around her finger. I noticed it one afternoon and had to look away so she wouldn't see the tears forming. Lila and I don't speak much now, not out of hatred, but because boundaries are the only way to keep the truth from bleeding out again. I don't know what our relationship will look like in the future. Maybe forgiveness will find us, maybe it won't. What I do know is this: love without honesty can still cause harm. Good intentions don't excuse stolen choices, and silence, no matter how gentle, has consequences that echo for decades. Naomi calls me by my first name. Sometimes she slips and says Mom, then corrects herself. I never ask her to. I let the word come when and if it's ready. My role now is not to reclaim the past. It's to show up in the present with integrity, patience, and truth. I lost years I can never replace, but I didn't lose my voice, and neither did my daughter. Our story is still being written, this time with all the pages open. Healing didn't arrive the way movies promise it will. There was no single conversation that fixed everything. No moment where Naomi suddenly understood and everything softened into forgiveness. What came instead was a long, uneven stretch of learning how to exist in each other's lives without the weight of expectation crushing us both. I had to unlearn the idea that I could somehow make up for 21 years of absence by being perfect now. Naomi had to sit with the reality that two women she loved had made decisions about her life without ever letting her choose. We were both grieving different versions of the same childhood, and grief doesn't move in straight lines. Our coffee meetings turned into walks, then dinners. Sometimes she asked questions that felt like gentle probes. Other times they landed like small explosions. She wanted to know why I didn't fight harder, why I didn't insist on bringing her home once I was healthy. Those were the hardest questions because the answers weren't flattering. I told her I was scared, that I didn't trust myself, that I let gratitude turn into silence because it felt safer than conflict. Saying those things out loud stripped away the last of my defenses. I couldn't hide behind illness anymore. I had to own the part of the story that was mine. Naomi didn't punish me for that honesty. She just nodded, like someone filing away facts they would need later to understand the shape of their own life. One evening, months into this fragile rebuilding, Naomi asked if I had any pictures of her as a baby. I laughed softly, a sad sound, and told her I had boxes. She came over for the first time that weekend. We sat on the floor, photo albums spread between us like a bridge. She lingered over images of me holding her, of hospital bracelets still on my wrist, of her tiny face pressed against my chest. She said she'd never seen these before. Leela had kept the early years sparse, as if minimizing me and her origin story would make things simpler. Naomi traced the edge of one picture and whispered, "You look tired, but happy." I told her I was both. I told her loving her saved me even when I wasn't there. As our relationship deepened, I began to understand something uncomfortable. Leela hadn't just raised Naomi, she had shaped the narrative of who I was in Naomi's mind. That kind of power leaves fingerprints everywhere. Naomi struggled with guilt whenever she enjoyed time with me, as if happiness were a betrayal. I recognized that feeling. It was the same one I'd carried for years, grateful and ashamed all at once. We talked about it openly. We named it. And slowly, naming it took away some of its control. There was a day Naomi asked me if I regretted letting her stay. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told her I regretted the silence, not the help. I regretted not asking harder questions, not demanding clearer boundaries. I regretted trusting that love alone would protect us. But I didn't regret surviving. I didn't regret choosing her stability over my pride when I had no strength left. Regret is complicated. It can sit beside gratitude without canceling it out. Naomi seemed relieved by that answer, like she'd been carrying the burden of justifying her own childhood. The first time Naomi introduced me to someone as her mother, it happened accidentally. We were at a small bookstore, and she ran into a friend. She gestured toward me and said, "This is my mom." Then she froze, eyes flicking to mine, waiting for correction or confirmation. I smiled and said hello. Later, she apologized, voice tight. I told her there was nothing to apologize for. Titles aren't contracts. They're expressions of connection. They can change shape without losing meaning. That night, I cried alone, quietly, because even though I didn't demand the word, Hearing it felt like something long denied finally being acknowledged. Leela and I spoke once more after that. She called me unexpectedly, her voice cautious. She said Naomi had been distant, that she felt like she was losing her. I told her loss isn't always theft. Sometimes it's the natural consequence of truth. I didn't say it cruelly. I said it with the same tired understanding I'd gained from my own mistakes. I told her Naomi wasn't a possession to be held tighter when threatened. She was a person learning who she was outside of carefully curated stories. Leela cried. I listened, but I didn't offer comfort the way I used to. Boundaries mean you don't rescue people from the discomfort of accountability. Time continued to do what time does best. It softened some edges and sharpened others. Naomi started therapy. So did I. We shared books, articles, language for things we'd only felt before. We learned that families built on secrets don't collapse all at once. They creak and strain until someone finally opens a window. Naomi began to ask about my life outside of her, my friendships, my regrets, my joys. She wanted to know me as a whole person, not just a role. That curiosity felt like trust. One afternoon, while cooking together, Naomi asked if I thought Leela loved her less now that she was asking questions. I told her love doesn't disappear when it's challenged. It just reveals what it was made of. If Leela's love was strong enough, it would survive honesty. If it wasn't, that wasn't Naomi's responsibility to fix. Saying those things out loud stripped away the last of my defenses. I couldn't hide behind illness anymore. I had to own the part of the story that was mine. Naomi didn't punish me for that honesty. She just nodded, like someone filing away facts they would need later to understand the shape of their own life. I don't know what the future holds for us. I don't know how holidays will look or what names will settle into place. What I do know is that silence cost us more than truth ever could have. And now, every conversation we have is a small act of courage, a refusal to repeat the past. Naomi and I are learning each other slowly, imperfectly, but honestly. And for the first time, that feels like enough. There is a strange loneliness that comes with rebuilding something that should have existed all along. Naomi and I were creating memories in real time, but every laugh seemed to echo against the absence of the years that should have been there. I had to remind myself constantly not to rush her, not to rush us. Love that's been delayed needs patience more than intensity. I learned to measure progress in small moments instead of grand gestures. A text sent without hesitation, a call made just to share something ordinary, an invitation that didn't feel like an obligation. One evening, Naomi asked if she could stay over. The request was casual, but I felt the weight of it immediately. She had never slept under my roof before. I tried not to show how much it meant to me, how my hands shook as I changed the sheets and folded towels like this was a ceremony. That night, we stayed up late talking in the living room, the television muted, the city lights filtering in through the window. She asked about my marriage, about the man who left. I told her the truth without bitterness, that love can fail without either person being evil, that sometimes people leave because staying would require facing themselves. Naomi listened closely, then said softly that Lila always told her her father left because he wasn't ready to be a parent. The pattern was impossible to ignore. It was easier to frame absence as weakness than as choice. The next morning, I made breakfast while Naomi scrolled through her phone at the table, hair messy, comfortable in a way that felt both new and ancient. She watched me cook and said, almost to herself, "I think I get it now." I asked what she meant. She said that Lila had been afraid too, afraid of being alone, afraid of losing the family she built. Fear doesn't excuse what she did, Naomi said, but it explains why it felt easier for her to keep the truth quiet. Hearing Naomi articulate that with such clarity made me proud and sad all at once. This was emotional intelligence forged in fire. No child should have to grow up learning how to interpret adults' fears. As Naomi grew more secure with me, tension with Lila increased. Naomi started setting boundaries, declining calls, postponing visits. Lila interpreted that as rejection. She reached out to me again, this time with frustration laced through her words. She accused me of poisoning Naomi against her. I told her calmly that truth doesn't poison, silence does, that Naomi was responding to honesty, not manipulation. The conversation ended without resolution, but for the first time I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. That too was growth. There were moments when guilt still crept in. When Naomi would talk about childhood memories I wasn't part of, I felt the familiar ache of being an observer in my own story. But instead of withdrawing, I learned to stay present. I asked questions. I let myself be curious instead of ashamed. Naomi noticed. She said once that she appreciated how I didn't compete with Lila for space in her past, that I didn't try to rewrite it. That meant more to her than dramatic apologies ever could. We had our first real argument a year into knowing each other. It was over something small, missed plans, misunderstood expectations, but underneath it was everything we hadn't said yet. Naomi accused me of still holding back, of being afraid to fully claim her. I accused her of testing me to see if I'd disappear again when things got hard. The words landed hard. We both went quiet. Then Naomi started crying, saying she didn't know how to trust that I wouldn't choose distance again when things got hard. I told her I couldn't promise perfection, but I could promise presence, that I was done letting fear make decisions for me, that if she wanted me in her life, I was here, not conditionally, not quietly, but openly. That argument changed something fundamental. It shifted our relationship from cautious to real. Trust isn't built by never hurting each other. It's built by staying when you do. After that, Naomi began to introduce me more confidently. She invited me to meet her friends. She asked for advice about work, about relationships. Sometimes she called just to vent, her voice familiar on the other end of the line in a way that finally felt natural. Each time she did, it stitched something back together inside me. Lila eventually stopped calling. I heard through Naomi that she was struggling, questioning her identity now that motherhood wasn't the center of her world. I felt compassion, but also clarity. She had built her sense of self around being needed. When that need shifted, she felt untethered. That was not Naomi's burden to carry, nor was it mine. I hoped Lila would find support, therapy, a way to reckon with what she'd done without rewriting history again. But I no longer needed that outcome to heal. The most surprising part of this journey has been forgiveness, not as an event, but as a practice. Some days I forgive Lila easily. Some days the anger resurfaces sharp and hot. I let it pass without judgment. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or reconciling. It means choosing not to let the past dictate every emotional response. It means allowing myself to move forward even when the story behind me is incomplete. Naomi and I are still writing ours, slowly, honestly, with space for mistakes and room for growth. I didn't get to raise my child the way I dreamed, but I get to know the woman she's become, and that, in its own quiet way, feels like a second chance, earned not through silence or sacrifice, but through truth. There came a moment when I realized I was no longer waiting for something to be taken from me. For years, even after Naomi and I began rebuilding, I lived with a low, constant fear that this connection could still disappear, that one wrong word, one misunderstanding could send her retreating back into the only version of family she'd ever known. But one afternoon, as we sat together folding laundry in my living room, an ordinary, almost boring task, I noticed how natural everything felt. She was talking about her work, complaining about a coworker with dramatic exaggeration, tossing socks into neat piles without being asked, and I realized I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I was just there. That was when Naomi told me she was thinking of moving closer, not in a dramatic announcement way, just as a passing thought. She said commuting to see me was tiring, that she liked the neighborhood, that it felt grounding to have more than one place that felt like home. I kept my voice steady as I responded, but inside something bloomed quietly, carefully. I told her she should do whatever made her life feel fuller, not whatever made me feel better. She smiled at that. She said she was learning the difference. Moving brought up old emotions for Naomi. Sorting through her belongings meant revisiting memories stored in boxes, school projects, childhood drawings, photos with Leela smiling in the background. She invited me to help one weekend. I hesitated, unsure if my presence would feel intrusive, but she insisted. As we went through things together, she asked questions about the early photos I recognized. Who took this one? Why am I wearing that sweater? I answered when I could and admitted when I couldn't. I didn't try to fill in gaps with guesses. Honesty, even when incomplete, had become our shared language. At one point, Naomi held up a handmade card addressed to Mom in a child's handwriting. She stared at it for a long time, then asked quietly if it made me uncomfortable. I told her no, that her love wasn't a limited resource, that she didn't have to erase one story to honor another. She nodded, relieved, and placed the card back in the box. That small exchange felt like a turning point. She was no longer guarding my feelings at the expense of her own. She trusted me to handle the truth. Leela reached out again during that period, her message tentative. She said she felt like she was being written out of Naomi's life. I took time before responding. Then I told her that being a parent, biological or not, means accepting when your role changes, that Naomi wasn't erasing her, she was expanding her understanding of herself. I reminded Leela gently but firmly that the foundation of their relationship had to shift from control to trust. Whether Leela could do that was up to her. I couldn't carry that responsibility for her anymore. Naomi did move closer. The first night in her new place, she invited me over for dinner. She cooked nervously, over-seasoned the food, laughed at herself. I watched her move around the kitchen, confident yet unsure, and felt a deep, quiet pride. This was my daughter, not because of biology alone, but because of the way we chose each other now. After dinner, she asked if I ever thought about what life would have been like if I'd raised her. I told her sometimes I imagined small things, braiding her hair, packing lunches, but I didn't let myself live in that imagined world for too long. It wasn't fair to either of us. She said I was glad I didn't try to replace what already existed, that she liked who she was, even with the complicated beginning. As our bond strengthened, Naomi began talking about her future in a way that included me naturally. She mentioned holidays, long-term plans, even hypothetical grandchildren with a casual certainty that still caught me off guard. I didn't correct her. I didn't ask for reassurance. I simply let myself believe that this connection was no longer provisional. It was real. The moral clarity I gained through all of this surprised me. For so long, I believed love meant self-erasure, that being a good mother meant stepping back, staying quiet, letting others lead. I see now how incomplete that understanding was. Love also means advocacy. It means showing up even when it's uncomfortable. It means telling the truth before silence turns into a story someone else gets to tell for you. I don't regret surviving the way I did. I regret not trusting that I deserved a voice alongside gratitude. Naomi and I talk about that now, not with blame, but with insight. She says it's helped her understand her own tendency to over-accommodate. She sees where it came from. Breaking cycles doesn't require perfect parents. It requires honest ones. Our relationship isn't loud or dramatic. It's built on shared meals, check-in texts, late-night phone calls. It's built on the understanding that we lost time, but we didn't lose each other completely. And that, for me, is the quiet miracle at the center of all this. Not a reunion that erases the past, but a present that finally belongs to us both. The closer Naomi moved into her own life, the more I noticed how much I had shaped mine around absence. For years, my routines were built to avoid reminders. No toys left behind, no bedtime rituals, no family photos on the walls. Even after Naomi came back into my world, I realized I was still living like someone who didn't expect permanence. That awareness didn't arrive with shame, it arrived with responsibility. If I was asking Naomi to trust my presence, I had to inhabit it fully. I started making changes that seemed small on the surface but felt enormous inside. I framed a photo of us from the bookstore the day she accidentally called me Mom. I cleared out the spare room, not because I expected her to move in, but because I wanted my home to reflect the truth of my life now. When Naomi noticed these things, she didn't comment directly. She just seemed to relax a little more each time she visited, like her body was registering safety before her mind did. One evening, Naomi asked me if I ever thought about telling my story publicly. I laughed at first, assuming she meant friends or family, but she said something deeper. She said silence had shaped so much of her life, and she wondered what it might feel like for both of us if the truth existed outside closed rooms. I didn't answer right away. For most of my life, privacy had been my armor, but I understood what she was really asking. She wanted confirmation that our story wasn't something to be hidden anymore. I told her I wasn't ready to tell it everywhere, but I was ready to stop protecting lies that were never mine to begin with. She smiled and said that was enough. That answer seemed to settle something in her. Later, I realized it settled something in me, too. There were still moments of grief that surprised me, seeing mothers with daughters Naomi's age shopping together, hearing stories about childhood traditions I never got to create. Those moments didn't break me the way they used to. Instead, they passed through like weather, noticeable, sometimes heavy, but no longer permanent. I allowed myself to mourn without spiraling. Loss acknowledged loses some of its power. Naomi invited me to meet Lila for coffee one afternoon. The request caught me off guard. She said she didn't want to keep living in divided worlds, that she needed to see what honesty looked like when everyone was in the same room. I agreed, with clear boundaries in my heart. The meeting was awkward, restrained, painfully polite. Lila looked at Naomi like someone afraid of saying the wrong thing. Naomi looked at her like someone learning to see clearly without filters. There was no dramatic confrontation, no apologies that erased the past. What happened instead was quieter and harder. Naomi spoke. She said she loved Lila, that she was grateful for her upbringing, and that she was angry too, that she wished she'd been trusted with the truth earlier. Lila cried. She apologized, not defensively this time, not conditionally. She admitted fear had guided too many of her choices. I listened without interrupting, without stepping in to manage emotions. That wasn't my role anymore. Afterward, Naomi told me she felt lighter, not healed completely, but lighter. She said she finally felt like her life made sense. That sentence stayed with me. Sometimes healing isn't about fixing what was broken. It's about understanding how it broke so you don't keep cutting yourself on the same edges. As months passed, Naomi began to share more of her inner world with me. She talked about therapy breakthroughs, about patterns she was trying to unlearn. She told me she was afraid of abandonment in relationships, that she often made herself small to keep people close. I told her gently where I thought that came from, not as blame, but as context. We traced the roots together, mother and daughter, learning how to separate what happened to us from who we are allowed to become. I also learned to forgive myself in deeper ways, not the surface level forgiveness that says I did my best and moves on, but the kind that sits with the truth and says, I wish I'd known then what I know now. That kind of forgiveness takes time. It requires letting go of the fantasy that there was a perfect version of you waiting just beyond one different decision. Life doesn't work like that. We become who we are by surviving the choices we make with the information we have. Once, Naomi asked me what lesson I hoped she carried from all this. I told her that love should never require erasure, that if you have to disappear to keep peace, the peace isn't real. I told her she deserved relationships where truth was welcomed, even when it was uncomfortable. She nodded slowly, like she was storing that lesson somewhere important. Our story didn't end with a reunion montage or a tidy bow. It continues in ordinary days, in shared grocery trips and long phone calls, in mutual respect and earned trust. I didn't get to raise my child, but I get to walk beside her now, and that walk, uneven, honest, deeply human, has taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on or letting go, it's finally telling the truth and staying. There is a quiet shift that happens when a relationship stops feeling fragile. Naomi and I reached that place not with celebration, but with consistency. Days stacked on days, promises kept without announcement, disagreements resolved without threats of disappearance. I noticed it the first time she canceled plans and didn't apologize excessively, didn't explain herself into exhaustion. She simply said she needed a night alone, and I believed her. I didn't hear rejection in her voice. That was new for both of us. As our bond stabilized, Naomi began to reflect more openly on her childhood, not just the facts of it, but the emotional climate. She told me she often felt responsible for Leela's happiness, that she learned early how to read moods, how to perform gratitude so well it became automatic. She said she didn't realize how heavy that responsibility was until it lifted. Hearing that broke my heart in a different way. I hadn't raised her, but the absence I left behind still shaped how she learned to love. That truth was hard to sit with, but I didn't run from it. I stayed. Sometimes accountability isn't about what you did directly, but about acknowledging the impact of what you couldn't prevent. Naomi started dating someone seriously around that time. She told me about him slowly, cautiously, like she was testing whether sharing happiness would invite loss. When she finally introduced us, I watched how she interacted with him, how she compromised too quickly, how she laughed off discomfort. Later, she asked my opinion. I chose my words carefully. I didn't criticize him. I spoke about her, about how she deserved to take up space, about how love didn't have to be earned through flexibility. She listened. A few weeks later, she told me she'd ended the relationship, not because it was terrible, but because it wasn't honest. She said she finally recognized the feeling of shrinking herself. She didn't want to build a future that way. I felt an unexpected swell of pride, not because she made the choice I would have made, but because she made it consciously. Leela faded further into the background during this time, not vanished, but no longer central. Naomi spoke to her occasionally, carefully. Their relationship had changed shape, less enmeshed, more defined. Leela struggled with that. She tried to relive old routines, to assert familiarity where distance now existed. Naomi responded with kindness and firmness. Watching her do that was like watching someone step into adulthood with both feet planted. I didn't intervene. I didn't advise unless asked. That restraint was part of my healing, too. One afternoon, Naomi surprised me by asking about my own childhood. I realized then how little she knew about the woman behind the mother-shaped absence. I told her about my parents, about how love in my family was quiet and conditional, about how illness had taught me to be grateful even when I was hurting. She listened with tenderness that felt mutual, not hierarchical. It struck me that we were no longer just rebuilding a lost relationship, we were building a new one based on who we were now. There was a moment during a holiday dinner when Naomi raised a glass and thanked me for being patient. The word caught me off guard. I hadn't thought of myself that way. She said patience was what made the difference, that I didn't rush her grief or her confusion, that I let her lead without disappearing. Hearing that reframed the entire journey for me. I had spent so many years believing I failed because I stepped back, but the truth was more complex. Stepping back without clarity caused harm. Stepping forward with humility allowed healing. I still think about the years I missed. That ache hasn't vanished. It probably never will, but it no longer defines me. I've learned that motherhood isn't only measured in milestones and memories, it's also measured in repair, in the courage to show up after loss, in the willingness to hear hard truths without retreating. I didn't raise my child, but I am raising a relationship with her now, one conversation, one honest moment at a time. Naomi once told me she no longer feels split between two worlds. She said she feels integrated, like her life finally belongs to her. That is the greatest gift this journey has given me. Not absolution, not validation, but the knowledge that truth, even delayed, can still bring wholeness. Silence took years from us. Honesty gave us something new. Our story doesn't erase what happened. It holds it. It acknowledges the cost without letting the cost become the ending. And if there is a lesson in all of this, it's one I carry forward every day. Love that is real does not require secrecy to survive. It requires courage, accountability, and the willingness to stay present even when the past is heavy. Naomi and I are still here, still talking, still choosing each other. And that choice, made freely and with open eyes, matters more than anything that was decided for us long ago. As Naomi and I settled into a rhythm that finally felt steady, something unexpected happened inside me. I stopped introducing her in my mind as the daughter I lost, and started thinking of her as the daughter I have. That shift was subtle but powerful. Loss keeps you looking backward. Presence demands you look where you're standing. I realized how often I'd been bracing for disappointment, waiting for the moment she'd pull away again. Letting go of that fear felt like learning to breathe with my whole chest for the first time in years. Naomi began spending more holidays with me, sometimes splitting time between homes, sometimes choosing one without apology. Watching her make those decisions for herself, without guilt, without explanation, was its own kind of healing. It showed me that the control Leela once held over the narrative no longer had power. Naomi wasn't choosing sides, she was choosing herself, and I was honored to be part of that choice. There was a weekend trip we took together that marked another quiet milestone. We drove to a small coastal town, nothing fancy, just a place I used to go alone when I needed to think. I told Naomi that story as we walked along the shore, wind tangling her hair the same way it tangled mine. She said she liked that I had places and memories that existed without her, that it made our time together feel like a meeting of two whole people, not a correction of a mistake. That comment stayed with me. For so long, I believed wholeness required fixing the past. Naomi was showing me it could also mean accepting it. On that trip, she asked me something I hadn't expected. She asked if I ever resented Leela for being able to do what I couldn't. The question was careful, respectful. I told her the truth. That resentment came and went, that sometimes it flared up when I thought about bedtime stories and school mornings. But mostly what I felt now was clarity. Leela didn't steal those moments from me out of cruelty. She took advantage of my silence. That distinction mattered. It didn't excuse the harm, but it helped me release the need to frame everything in extremes. Life is rarely that simple. Naomi nodded and said she was learning the same lesson about people, that someone can love you deeply and still make choices that hurt you, that love doesn't cancel impact. Hearing her articulate that with such maturity made me realize how much she had grown, not in spite of the truth, but because of it. Honesty gave her language. Language gave her power. When we returned from the trip, Naomi suggested something that surprised me. She wanted to write a letter to her younger self. She asked if I would do it too. At first I resisted. The idea felt indulgent, maybe even painful, but we sat together at my kitchen table, pens hovering. I wrote to the woman I was at 24, exhausted and afraid, believing silence was the same thing as sacrifice. I told her she wasn't weak for needing help. I told her she deserved clarity, not just care. Naomi shared parts of hers with me. She wrote to a little girl who learned early how to adapt, how to be grateful even when something felt off. We cried. Then we laughed at how similar our letters sounded. Two people shaped by the same silence, finally speaking. Leela did not disappear from Naomi's life entirely. Their relationship settled into something quieter, less consuming. Leela struggled with that, sometimes reaching out with nostalgia-heavy messages, trying to anchor Naomi to the past. Naomi responded with kindness, but not compliance. She no longer felt responsible for filling emotional gaps that weren't hers to fill. Watching that boundary hold was one of the clearest signs that healing was real. I also noticed changes in myself. I stopped shrinking my needs in friendships. I asked for clarity when things felt uncertain. I no longer mistook gratitude for obligation. These weren't dramatic transformations. They were practical, lived-in shifts that changed how I moved through the world. Naomi noticed too. She once told me she admired how I'd learned to take up space without apology. That compliment felt earned in a way nothing else ever had. The truth is, losing time with my child shaped me forever. It left scars that will always ache under certain conditions, but it also taught me something essential about love and responsibility. Love is not proven by how much you endure in silence. It's proven by how honestly you show up, even when your voice shakes. Responsibility doesn't mean protecting people from discomfort at all costs. It means trusting them with the truth so they can choose freely. Naomi and I talk about the future now with an ease that once felt impossible, not in rigid plans, but in shared imaginings, trips we might take, traditions we might create, lives that intersect without consuming each other. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We carry it with us, acknowledged and understood, no longer hidden. I once believed my story as a mother ended the day I let my child go. I see now how wrong that was. Stories don't end when we step back. They end when we stop telling the truth. And as long as Naomi and I keep choosing honesty, our story, however unconventional, continues. There is a point in healing where you stop measuring progress by pain and start noticing peace. It doesn't arrive loudly. It shows up in moments you almost miss. Naomi calling to ask what I'm cooking because she's craving something familiar. Her leaving a sweater at my place without comment, like she assumes she'll be back. Me realizing I don't rehearse conversations in my head before we have them anymore. The relationship no longer feels like it could disappear if mishandled. It feels rooted. One afternoon, Naomi asked if I would come with her to visit her childhood home. She hadn't been back in months. The request was careful, but I understood what it meant. She wanted to walk through that space without secrets, without dividing her life into before and after. I agreed, even though my stomach tightened at the thought. When we arrived, the house looked smaller than I remembered, less powerful. Leela greeted us politely, cautiously. The air was heavy with unsaid things, but Naomi didn't flinch. She moved through the room slowly, narrating memories as if reclaiming them. She pointed to the corner where she used to do homework, the kitchen table where arguments were quietly swallowed, the hallway mirror where she learned how to look okay even when she wasn't. At one point, Naomi stopped in front of a framed photo of herself as a child, Leela's arm around her shoulders. She studied it, then turned to me and said, "This was real, and so is what I'm building now." The statement wasn't defensive, it was declarative. It was the sound of integration. Leela listened, eyes wet, but she didn't interrupt. That restraint felt like progress too. After we left, Naomi exhaled deeply and said she felt like she'd closed a door without slamming it. I knew exactly what she meant. Closure isn't about erasing a chapter, it's about putting it back on the shelf where it belongs. That visit marked something important. From then on, Naomi stopped framing parts of her life as competing truths. She allowed them to coexist without explanation. As for me, I noticed a new kind of confidence settling in. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet kind that comes from alignment. I no longer felt the need to justify my past choices every time they came up. I could say, I was sick. I made the best decision I could with the information I had, and I could say it without apology. Naomi heard that confidence and mirrored it. She stopped apologizing for her own boundaries. She stopped cushioning her honesty. There was a moment during a late-night conversation when Naomi said something that finally released the last thread of guilt I'd been carrying. She said, "I don't see you as the mother who left. I see you as the mother who came back when the truth was finally allowed." Those words settled into me slowly, like something healing a wound from the inside out. Coming back isn't about physical presence alone. It's about emotional courage. It's about being willing to be known. Naomi began mentoring a younger coworker around that time, someone struggling with family expectations and unspoken obligations. She told me she recognized herself in that girl, that she wanted to offer her what she never had: clarity, permission, choice. Watching Naomi become that kind of presence in someone else's life felt like witnessing the ripple effect of truth. What we heal in ourselves doesn't stop with us, it travels. I also started speaking more openly with friends about my past, not in detail, not for sympathy, but without deflection. I stopped minimizing. I stopped pretending the loss didn't shape me. The response surprised me. People didn't see me as weak or irresponsible. They saw me as human. That realization reinforced something important. Silence often isolates us more than truth ever could. Naomi and I celebrated her birthday together that year with a quiet dinner at home. No competing guest lists, no divided loyalties, just the two of us, cooking and laughing, music playing softly in the background. At one point, she raised her glass and said, "Thank you for staying." Not for coming back, for staying. The distinction mattered. Staying requires consistency. It requires choosing the relationship again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it stirs old pain. I told her staying was the easiest choice I've ever made now that fear isn't driving me. As the night wound down, Naomi asked if I ever wondered who I would have been if things had been different. I told her sometimes, yes, but then I added something I'd only recently realized, that the woman I am now, someone who values honesty, boundaries, and presence, exists because of what I lived through. I wouldn't wish that path on anyone, but I also don't regret becoming someone capable of this kind of love. Our story doesn't end with reconciliation or forgiveness as a finish line. It ends, or rather continues, with understanding, with two people choosing to build something real in the space where something was once taken. I didn't raise my child, but I helped raise a truth that finally set us both free. And that truth, once spoken, kept choosing us back. As the years moved forward, I began to understand that what Naomi and I had built wasn't fragile anymore. It was flexible, strong enough to bend without breaking. That understanding changed how I approached everything else in my life. I stopped living as if stability was something that could vanish overnight. I stopped guarding joy like it was temporary. The fear that once shaped every decision loosened its grip, and in its place grew a quieter confidence rooted in earned trust. Naomi started talking about long-term plans with a kind of grounded certainty that told me she finally felt safe in her own future. She spoke about career moves, about possibly relocating one day, about relationships she hoped to build differently than the ones she'd witnessed growing up. I listened without panic. I didn't hear distance as abandonment anymore. I heard growth. That was new for me. For so long, I'd equated closeness with safety. Now I understood that true closeness allows movement. One evening, Naomi asked me if I would walk her down the aisle someday if she chose to get married. The question was casual, almost offhand, but it landed with weight. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to be honest about what that symbol meant. I told her I would be honored if that felt right to her when the time came. I also told her she didn't owe me symbolic gestures to validate our relationship. She smiled and said that was exactly why she asked. She wanted choice, not obligation. That exchange felt like a full circle moment. Two people once bound by silence, now united by consent. Lila remained a distant presence, not erased, not vilified, just no longer central. Naomi spoke of her occasionally, with a mix of affection and sadness. She acknowledged the love she'd been given and the harm that had come with it. There was no urgency to resolve those feelings. They existed side by side, and that was okay. Watching Naomi hold complexity without collapsing into guilt or denial showed me how far she'd come. It also reminded me how much damage simplicity can do when it's built on lies. I found myself reflecting often on the younger version of me, the woman in the hospital bed, scared and exhausted, believing she had to choose between survival and motherhood. If I could speak to her now, I would tell her that asking for help doesn't mean surrendering your voice, that gratitude should never cost you your place in the story, that love without boundaries invites confusion, not closeness. These weren't lessons I learned quickly. They were carved into me slowly, through loss and return, through silence and speech. Naomi once told me she no longer feels like her life was something that happened to her. She feels like it belongs to her now. That sense of ownership was the true healing, not the reconciliation, not the conversations, but the reclamation of agency. And in helping her reclaim that, I reclaimed something too. I stopped seeing myself as the woman who failed and started seeing myself as the woman who learned. There are still moments when grief surfaces unexpectedly, a mother-daughter event I never attended, a memory Naomi describes that doesn't include me. Those moments still ache, but they no longer come with self-punishment. I let the feeling pass, acknowledge it, and return to the present where I am wanted, known, and chosen. Healing didn't erase the scar. It taught me how to live without reopening the wound. Naomi and I created a small tradition together, nothing elaborate. Once a month, we take a walk somewhere new. No phones, no agenda, just conversation and movement. We talk about books, about fears, about the small observations that make up a life. Those walks have become my anchor, proof that relationships don't need shared beginnings to have meaningful continuity. They need intention. Looking back now, I see how easily love can be reshaped by fear when honesty is delayed. I see how good intentions, left unchecked, can become quiet forms of control. And I see how truth, even when it arrives late, can still build something sturdy and real. Naomi and I are not defined by what was taken from us. We are defined by what we chose to rebuild. If there is a moral to this story, it isn't about blame or revenge. It's about voice, about refusing to disappear for the comfort of others, about trusting that the people who truly love you can handle the truth, and about understanding that it's never too late to come back, not to the past, but to yourself. Naomi didn't grow up with me, but she grew into someone who knows me, and I grew into someone who knows herself. That mutual knowing is the foundation we stand on now, not perfect, not untouched, but honest. And that honesty, finally, feels like home. There is a quiet kind of peace that comes when a story no longer asks to be rewritten. When you can hold it in your hands, see its rough edges, its missing pages, and still say, "This is mine." Naomi and I reached that place not with ceremony, but with acceptance. The need to explain ourselves, to each other, to the past, to anyone else, slowly faded. What replaced it was presence. And presence, I've learned, is the most honest form of love. One evening, as we sat together watching the sky darken from my balcony, Naomi said something that felt like an ending and a beginning at the same time. She said she no longer wondered who she would have been if I had raised her. She said she finally understood that imagining a different past didn't give her a better future. What gave her peace was knowing the truth and being allowed to choose what to do with it. Hearing that felt like the last knot inside me loosening. For years, I'd carried the weight of hypothetical lives, what might have been, what should have been. Letting those go didn't erase the grief, but it freed me from living inside it. We talked that night about legacy, about what gets passed down beyond blood and years spent together. Naomi said she thought legacy was honesty, the courage to tell the truth even when it disrupts comfort, the willingness to repair instead of disappear. I told her I agreed. I told her that if there was one thing I hoped she carried forward, it was the knowledge that her needs matter, that love should never demand silence as proof of loyalty. She smiled and said she already knew that now, that she learned it by watching me find my voice after losing it for so long. Leela remains part of Naomi's story, but not the author of it anymore. Their relationship exists with clearer lines, fewer illusions. I don't know if Leela has fully forgiven herself or if she ever will. That isn't mine to resolve. What I do know is that control disguised as love eventually collapses under the weight of truth, and love that is willing to loosen its grip has a chance to survive. As for me, I no longer introduce myself internally as the woman who lost her child. I am the woman who found her again, not in infancy, not in the ways I once imagined, but in adulthood, through courage and accountability. I am also the woman who learned that survival choices deserve compassion, not lifelong punishment, that you can be grateful for help and still demand honesty, that you can forgive without forgetting and move forward without rewriting history. Naomi and I don't pretend our story is simple. We don't soften it for easy understanding. When people ask about our relationship, we tell the truth in the shape it needs to take, sometimes brief, sometimes deeper. We don't owe anyone a version that makes them comfortable. That, too, is part of our healing. The greatest lesson this journey has taught me is that silence is never neutral. It always serves someone. For years, it served fear. It served control. It served the illusion of peace. But when silence finally broke, it didn't destroy us. It clarified us. It allowed Naomi to become whole and allowed me to become present. I didn't get the motherhood I dreamed of when I first held my daughter in my arms, but I got something equally sacred. I got a relationship built on choice, truth, and mutual respect. I got to witness the woman my daughter became and to know her, not as an idea, not as a memory, but as herself, and she got to know me too, not as a shadow or a story told by someone else, but as a flawed, honest human being who loves her without conditions. If you're listening to this and carrying a secret in the name of love, I want you to hear this clearly. Love that requires silence will eventually demand more than you can give, and the truth you're afraid will break everything might be the very thing that finally lets something real begin. My best friend raised my child. She never told her the whole truth, but the truth found its way back to us anyway, and when it didn't destroy our lives, it gave us our voices, and in those voices, Naomi and I finally found each other.